Two.
If this is what it's like to get canceled, I love it. That's Dave Chappelle about his Netflix special, The Closer. Is the pendulum on all things restrictive swinging back? It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called That Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how in this time of division we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
No, I understand what you're talking about.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real.
He says your headings, I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car.
Right.
Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it.
All right, everybody, welcome to the show. So, the cancel culture thing, we go back and forth on this, right? It's, is there a cancel culture? Isn't there? There's clearly a culture where we're canceling people. Let's not pretend. I mean, I don't care if you think it's the right, the left. I've said for a long time, sooner or later, the cancellation chopper comes and gets everybody. It sort of eats in on itself. But setting aside the Trump era and even just the politics, there's been an increasing tendency to restrict what people are allowed to say. I remember at a town hall I was covering live streaming in Culver City, and an activist said to me, he's saying hate speech, and he's not allowed to say it. And I was like, but can he? It's offensive, but can he still say it? No, it's hate speech. He's not allowed to say it. The idea there's certain things you can't say. Certain things you're not allowed to even utter. The words can't come out of your mouth. They can't be written on your Twitter. Those of you who watch me know I'm a big free speech guy. I believe the answer to bad speech is more speech, good speech, overpower the bad speech. I believe people are capable of handling that. But when it comes to comedy, it's something extra special and unique because lots of comics say offensive things. Not to be racist, not to be misogynistic, not to be hateful, just the opposite. To poke at what it is that we do, to make us laugh, to make us question, to make us think. Dave Chappelle has for a long time been one of those people. And in his most recent Netflix special, The Closer, he made some jokes, some comments about trans people. Now, Dave Chappelle may very well have an opinion about trans people and gender and biology. But regardless, he's a comic. He's making a joke. There is a thing called TERF. TERF is trans radical exclusionary feminists, people who are feminists but trans exclusionary. It took me a while. Radical feminists. They exclude trans and they're radical feminists. J.K. Rowling would fall in that camp. Somebody who says, listen, I'm not against trans people. I'm all for trans people. But let's not pretend that that there's gender here as well. And if you take away gender, you take away women's identity. And I've fought for women and women to be empowered and women to have rights and women to have unique voices and women to be treated differently the way they historically haven't been. And if you say gender doesn't really exist, then you're taking that platform away. J.K. Rowling, like others like her, is a feminist. But she excludes trans people in that sense, in saying you can choose what you want, but don't deny my right to have a binary gender. Dave Chappelle, in his stand-up special, hit right into it. Here's a little excerpt of what he said.
Now, I shouldn't speak on this because I am not a woman, nor am I trans. But as we've established, I am a feminist. I'm Team TERF. I agree. Gender is a fact. This is a fact. Every human being in this room, every human being on earth had to pass through the legs of a woman to be on earth. That is a fact.
Okay, well, so note two things. One, the applause and the laughter. That's what comedy should do. Two, I hate to say it. Dave Chappelle's right. I've said it for a long time. You can identify how you want. It doesn't mean gender is your choice. You can identify male. You can identify female. You have every right to. You have every right to choose the gender you want to be. I mean, sure, you're born with a gender, but gender can be fluid. I'll accept that. You know, gender doesn't even have to be biologically fluid, although it can also be biologically fluid. Some people can be born, you know, essentially with aspects of both chromosomes. You could be biologically fluid. Actually, that's, you know, biologically so. But your gender identity, that's a choice somebody could legitimately make. Well, maybe we've gone too far in my mind in sort of asking teenagers to go into class and question their gender. But the notion of gender identity being fluid or somebody having gender identity issues, valid, and nor should it be exclusionary. But biological sex exists. No one's going to convince me it doesn't. I've seen people write studies where they try to explain how technically the chromosomes don't. Sometimes you just got to kind of do the most obvious example, you know, the most obvious explanation to something. Occam's razor, you know, we all pop out of a woman. I know they say birth-bearing people to be PC. I don't know any birth-bearing men. Don't think anybody knows any birth-bearing men. Don't think anyone on the planet knows any earth-bearing men. I'm going to come back to where I am in a second. Magnet Obama, the right to be offended is free speech too, however, 150%. It's a great point. And it actually doesn't really change where I'm going with this, but I want to note, absolutely, the right to be offended, the right to be furious, the right to scream back, the right to say you're a complete a-hole, the right to say you're wrong, the right to say I'm disgusted that you would say that, all that. Yes, being offended is your right, and speak it loudly. But that's different than canceling someone. That's different than saying, because I'm offended, you don't get to say it. I can say you don't have to listen. Go in the other room. Don't show up at my show. But to say no one should see what you're saying because I'm offended, Magnet Obama, that's what I'm addressing. And the reaction to Dave Chappelle's comments, and again, I don't know what he really thinks. I'm guessing he actually thinks, yes, there's two biological genders. Does that make him transphobic? I've argued for a long time, identifying two biological genders doesn't make you a transphobic person. I am not one bit transphobic. I know that. Nothing's going to ever make me question that. Anybody who knows me well would know that. That doesn't mean I can't acknowledge two genders. You start with one gender and you decide one biological sex, and you decide you don't like it. It's not you. It's not what you feel. It's not who you are. And you switch to the other. You switched your gender. You can't actually completely switch your biology. Otherwise, I could have a sex change and have babies, and I can't. That's just the biology of the human species. But to the issue of making the jokes, Chappelle got blasted for what he said. Granted, he got applauded in that crowd, but he got blasted. And immediately came the calls to Netflix, pull the special. We've seen this movie before. We've seen it happen over and over. Something happens, boom, pull it, yank your advertising, you know, shut it down, whatever it is. Corporations fall at the knees of being woke. And this time, Netflix stood firm. Now, let me first start with the criticism. Let me show you a criticism. There are a couple sort of prominent ones. Crafty, can you pop up the Glad made this statement about Chappelle's show. Dave Chappelle's brand has become synonymous with ridiculing trans people and other marginalized communities. Negative reviews and viewers loudly condemning his latest special is a message to the industry that audiences don't support platforming anti-LGBTQ diatribes. We agree. And then pop up the next one, Crafty. And then Jocelyn Moore, the showrunner for Dear White People, basically says, you know, her story's on Netflix, her transition, and she won't work with them as long as they continued to put out blatantly and dangerously transphobic content. Thanks, Crafty. Now, Netflix is interesting. And before I'm going to defend Netflix's decision to defend Chappelle's show with a caveat. Dave Chappelle is very popular. His special before this, Sticks and Stones, is Netflix's most watched comedy show. It's also won a lot of awards. But Chappelle's a moneymaker. Netflix might have responded very differently with content that with something that wasn't as successful as Dave Chappelle is. But the president of Netflix came out and said, look, I get this is controversial and we don't mean to cause harm to people. He's like, and we are against inciting hate and violence, but I don't think what Chappelle is doing here is inciting hate and violence. And this is the caveat I want to say here. It's not a caveat, it's sort of an addendum. I don't think every time somebody says something that goes against your community, it inherently incites hate and violence, especially if it's done in a comedic way. My proof of that would be if that were the case, All in the Family would have triggered more racism. Now, I'm not saying some people don't react to it, but if you guys go back before we got all censorship crazy, look at All in the Family. All in the Family was in the 70s. It was literally a show in which the main character is the most racist, misogynistic person, you know, Archie Bunker, Carol O'Connor plays him, you could imagine. Norman Lear wasn't trying to promote racism and bigotry and misogyny. He was trying to ridicule it. And you laughed at Archie Bunker and what a complete moron he was. Now, there was something almost lovable about him at times, which had made him, you know, last. But the whole point was what a toad brain, dinosaur brain that guy had. Like, get with it, dude. Move into the future. That was the point of that comedy. But you could argue putting that up, well, you know, it's inciting hate and violence. Most of the most provocative comedy we've seen throughout in modern times has triggered that, you know. And you go back to the early days, right? You go to Lenny Bruce. You know, he put those things out there to make people have to pay attention and challenge them. And he was Jewish, you know. Richard Pryor, same thing. Those guys, you know, they just drilled at it. But they would technically be inciting hate and violence by that standard. So Netflix held strong and said, no, we're not going to. And we have other provocative comment. We have Cuties. We have, 13 Reasons Why, 365 Days, you know, My Unorthodox Life. We have other content, you know, up there that could be harmful in some people's eyes and challenging, but we're sticking with it. But here's where it got interesting to me. So Chappelle went to the Hollywood Bowl for a thing for his documentary, and he came out and said, he walked out and he got a standing ovation, and he said, if this is what being canceled is like, I love it. And then he said, fuck Twitter, fuck NBC News, ABC News, all these stupid ass networks. I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you. This is real life. Now, by the way, that audience there was packed with celebs. Among them, Brad Pitt, Stevie Wonder, Tiffany Haddish. Like, there were a lot of celebs, liberal celebs in that audience standing up and applauding him. Why? Because they know Dave Chappelle. Is Dave Chappelle a transphobic human being? Again, I don't know. I'm not in his head. You know, I hate when people assume they know what someone is. You don't unless you know them. And even then you might not. Do you really have to know them? But comics are tricky. Like I said, Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, you know, George Carlin, you know, the old school days. You know, those guys would by all standards then be considered racist on all levels. You know, and certainly Dave Chappelle too, you know, could be by that standard. So, you know, Chris Rock, you know, hates black people, do the N-word stuff. So it's, you know, again, comedy is a way we provoke change. And when we're censoring that, it's worse than anything. Like, it's bad enough that we're censoring people's political dialogue, political thoughts. You want to start censoring art? It's like, I remember back when I was super young, I went to China and I was living in Beijing, China in the communist era. I mean, still is, but I'm talking the hardcore communist era in the late 80s. And I went to see a play, and it was like it's supposed to be funny. And the only thing they could do was they had to make fun of, it was politically correct humor. You had to make fun of the right things. Otherwise it wasn't okay. You'd be censored by the state. It's like, I remember thinking how hard to be an artist. You can only, and if you're going to try to make fun of the state, you better do it in such a clever, creative way that the state doesn't figure out, the government doesn't figure out that's what you're doing. because they'd censor you. Is that what comedy should be? We can only make fun of certain things. And what would that mean, guys? And think about it. Okay, how about this? Let's see. Only women can make fun of women. Only black people can make fun of black people. Only Jews can make fun of Jews. Latinos are Latinos. I mean, if you were, and gays of gays. So, if you were a gay comic and a black gay comic, you could make fun of blacks and gays, but you couldn't make fun of women. If you were a female lesbian black comic or biracial, you could make fun of just about everybody, especially if you were Jewish. But everybody else, you can only make fun of your group. It's absurd. And what about white people? Nobody should be able to make fun of white people, because except white people. White people wouldn't be great at making fun of white people. Maybe that's a racist comment right there. My point is, what are you going to do? Segment down who can make fun of who? I mean, that's the whole point, right? Open it up. Let people have fun. Let people have a good time, and laugh for the purpose, though. Most great comics are trying to not just make you laugh. They're trying to make you think, trying to make you question. And when we censor the ideas, when we censor thought, we're going the other way. We're not making people think. We're suppressing thought. And you suppress thought, you make people repress what they have. They don't stop thinking it. They just turn it inside. They don't go, okay, I don't think it anymore. You don't shine a light on it. You don't clean it out. It just stays there and festers. Shine a light on it. Laugh at it. That was all in the family. Shine a light on Archie Bunker, because that person's ridiculous. Now, there's a handful of people who are going to look at him and be like, I identify with him. But he's being laughed at through the whole show. Everybody's making fun of him. Rob Reiner, Sally Struthers, they're like literally laughing at him. Edith is like sort of beside herself, right? But I mean, literally, he's like a doofus. Make fun of it. Laugh at it. So I thought it was interesting. They said, this is real life. What's not real life? It's so interesting. This is real life. Meaning what? I thought it was fascinating. This is real life. Meaning F Twitter. Like, this is the real life. And I think it's true. And the reality is, as I started to say before, you're allowed to have a conversation about whether biology is real, whether there's two genders. You're also allowed to have a conversation about gender identity and fluidity. And you can think, I think people should be able to, move between a gender if they feel that. I don't think you can change your biology. I think you can believe both things. But the minute you start erasing that away, you also risk losing all kinds of things. I mean, look at gay people. What's the point of being attracted to your same sex and wanting, the long fought to be treated equally and be able to, have marriage just like straight people and all that? Why bother if there's no friggin' biology? If there's no two sexes, who cares? What would it even mean? A gay person's attracted to their same sex. If there's no sex, then you can't be gay. That's true. Actually, a somewhat logical conclusion if you think about it. If I'm attracted to the opposite sex, if you're going, no, but I'm gay, and they fought for a long time to be, and still do, not to be discriminated against for choosing to be attracted to their same sex. Well, if biological sex isn't really a fixed thing, then what's the point of that? There'd be no. It becomes an absolute like logical impossibility. Gender's a little different, as I said. But the whole point is you should be able to talk about and laugh about all of it. This is real life, Chappelle said. Now, what's not real life? Just to jump in, a little political edge here. I'm sorry, I'm going to go there. Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, and her little space thing, the space video. She's the chairman of the NASA space thing or whatever, and she did that video with the telescope and the thing. And it came out. All the kids in the video were like auditioned for it. They're all like YouTube stars, not all, but they were YouTube stars. They all auditioned to be in the video as kids hanging out with her. And like, are you kidding me? Like, seriously? And that's not, I'm making this up. Like, there are, if you watch it, there are all these, it looks like she's hanging out with the kids at the observatory doing the thing with the telescope. There are actors who've been cast to play kids excited, to engage with Vice President Harris, who's always like giggling ridiculously, and again, I'm not saying she can't laugh and have some fun, but it's not authentic. They said that about Kamala Harris before she was vice president, when she was a senator. You watch her. She never came off as authentic. I don't know what she's like in real life, but she comes off as so fake. I worked for Bill Clinton. You don't like him or hate him. But Bill Clinton privately was a lot like Bill Clinton publicly. I mean, there's always a public persona, but that was the guy. I worked with Al Gore, his vice president. Al Gore came off as this stiff, odd, robotic guy. That's who he was. He was that guy. He was this sort of empathy, emotionless guy. I mean, I walked up to Al Gore at the Kennedy Center at an award ceremony with two kids out of the hood, two really poor kids, 12, 13-year-old boys, wearing oversized clothes, hand-me-downs. And, walked up to Al Gore, who I didn't know, but I'm dressed nicely and we're at events at Kennedy Center, for God's sake. And I walked up to him and said, he was right when he's becoming vice president. I was like, sir, I wanted to introduce these two boys to you. They live in, and I, used the name of the project. So I didn't say a project, but you can look at them and tell they were poor black kids. And I was like, and they've never been here or anywhere like here or met anybody as important as you. Just wanted to introduce them to you. I'm not lying. Al Gore looked at me, looked at one kid, looked at the other kid, turned silently, said nothing, and walked away. I was literally like, are you kidding me? And one of the kids looked up at me and said, it's because we're black, right? I was like, oh my God. I was like, no, it's because he's an asshole. But, Bill Clinton would have picked him up one in each arm. Like, Ben, which one of you is going to be, the first black president? So my point is, I don't know if you don't know somebody, but Kamala Harris comes off as so inauthentic. So does Joe Biden, by the way. This whole notion that Joe Biden's Mr. Empathy, where did that come from? I want to know who started the Joe Biden's empathetic thing. I've watched Joe Biden for years. I'm a political junkie. I go back and I worked in politics, 25, 30 years ago. I don't know where it came up that Joe Biden was ever empathetic. Nothing about Joe Biden ever rang empathy. He's never known to be empathetic. The opposite. If anything, he was often kind of abrupt and harsh. And, the Anita Hill stuff, I mentioned that before when Clarence Thomas's hearings and he basically stomped down Anita Hill. He's never been empathetic. But somehow he's Mr. Empathy. Like he's the guy who cares. Even with the Gold Star families after the, terrorist attack in Kabul. Right? A couple of those families were like, he came up to us and all he seemed to want to do is talk about how he understood what we were feeling and how he'd lost his kid and the whole thing. They're like, you don't understand us. Empathy isn't being able to say, hey, I've been there too. Empathy is being able to feel another person and actually understand their pain. And they would know that. If you're truly empathetic, the other person feels it. Even if you say the wrong thing, they feel your empathy. He just kept tossing it out. My son died too. And he served. Didn't die in service, by the way, died years later of a brain tumor. But yes, you know what it's like to lose a kid. But it's truly empathetic. That's like the only place he ever seems to go. And even then, he couldn't really be truly empathetic to those families because they didn't feel it. And they said it. And it wasn't political for them. Like, you don't know how I feel right now. My kid just got blown up in a suicide bombing that you ordered. You don't know how I feel just because your kid died as well. Well, okay. It's not the same. That would be empathy. But anyway. Fake, fake, fake. And I don't know why we keep pretending they're not, because I'm sick of the fakeness. It's just annoying to me. And it's backfiring. All this fakeness is backfiring. People are over it. They really are. I think we're getting over I think there's a boomerang coming on the cancel culture. I think it's a big deal. Chappelle got a standing ovation at the Hollywood Bowl with a lot of liberal celebs, big names there. Because those celebs are like, we're done with this. You can see Brad Pitt. He must be like, I'm so over this. And Stevie Wonder's old school. But here's the other area where I think we're going to start to see a boomerang. And it's all the mandates. And I'm not going to get into the benefits, the pluses, the minuses, all that about vaccines in general and the COVID vaccines. Had that conversation. We'll have it again. We're going to have some really intriguing big doctors on soon to talk about it. But I do want to talk about the vaccine mandates because it's getting a little insane out there. I mean, in California, literally, you can't go in a restaurant if you don't have a vaccine. You can't go anywhere. You can go in the Staples Center. You can't go but a restaurant. And they're going to start mandating vaccinations for kids. Washington State is doing vax mandates. And, now there's a lawsuit from a fire marshal because he says I can't get it for health reasons. And there's no exception. Well, they say there's an exception, but they won't give him the exception. But, Washington State had an exception for pregnant women. Until they made the vaccine available and said it was safe for pregnant women, they took pregnant women out of that exemption. And that's a great example. Pregnant women. I've said it before. If you're a pregnant woman, you are taking a risk getting a vaccine. I don't care what your doctor is telling you. They can't know for sure you're not. They can think it might be okay. Pregnant women have only recently begun to be tested. You don't know. Most clinical trials don't have pregnant women in them at all because the risk of them offsetting the trial, because so many things can cause a miscarriage, you don't know if that would happen from the drug. So you keep them out of the general trials. You test them in specific trials for them. By the way, what pregnant woman wants to go into a test trial to make sure the drug doesn't kill her unborn baby? But, but that said, you don't know for sure. And Dr. Robert Malone, who controversial, but regardless is the architect of mRNA technology, someone I'm actually going to have on. He's the architect of mRNA technology. So whether you agree or not with certain things he says, nobody disputes it. Without him, we wouldn't have these vaccines. He didn't design the vaccines. He's a vaccine developer, but he was a huge part of the architecture of the platform upon which is built over the last 20 years. He knows more about it than 99.99% of the world. And he has some concerns. And when I asked him about pregnant women, he said, honestly, the advice I would give a pregnant woman is don't get the vaccine after you're pregnant for the first 3 months. Just don't do it. If you're going to do it before or do it after. And if you don't do it, he didn't go, you're fine. He's like, don't get COVID, because COVID could give you a miscarriage too. But the point is, it's not certain. And some people would rather make the choice to take that risk. Chandra Tucker, right. They've not studied all medication interactions either. They haven't studied a lot. And again, I have no problem with them saying we want people to get the vaccine because we think it's a good idea. That's a debate people are having. The vaccine, how much immunity can we get from that? But to pretend there aren't risks, to not be transparent, to not disclose that they just don't know because they haven't had enough time is complete lying. They can't know. It's humanly impossible as you can move forward in time to know because you haven't had a chance to see over the course of a few years what happens. Short term, we know. But we do know there are some interactions that aren't good. We know young, healthy boys, it's not high, but the chance of having heart inflammation that lasts for your whole life is 6 times higher than the risk of getting any serious illness from COVID. Now, they say it's rare. It's not likely that you're going to have that heart inflammation. But it's 6 times higher than a risk of serious COVID, which means how rare is serious COVID for a healthy teenage boy? If it's 6 times more for this heart inflammation, and that's rare, then it's super rare. And, a lot of countries, Denmark, I believe, certainly the UK have said, do not vaccinate young, healthy boys, teenage boys. It's riskier to vaccinate them than not. We're not there yet. But it's not just crazy, anti-COVIDers saying this. You have major European nations going, no, don't go there with that. It's too risky. We just don't know. So to argue you just should mandate and everyone has to do it, that's just going too far. And the third and biggest one I'm going to go to is natural immunity. That hasn't gotten a lot of press. And early on, people tried to knock it away. I don't know why. Your common sense should tell you natural immunity. Natural immunity is the strongest immunity there is. I mean, you get a disease, you get smallpox, you get chickenpox, you get the measles, you don't ever get it again. If you have an older person in your family, if you had a grandma who had measles way back in the day, or a great grandma or whoever, they never got it again. Their body's natural immunity forms the strongest shell there is. The fact that we're not having that conversation, and we're going to start to, because it got labeled as misinformation, and now suddenly we're seeing it's not. And sure, I've talked to doctors that have been more controversial who said, natural immunity is perfect. But I talked last week to Dr. Yadigar from a UC doctor who runs 2 hospitals. He's all the time on Extra, well-known, very outspoken. He runs, 2 ICUs, manages 20 physicians, is highly respected, highly mainstream in that way. And he had a whole conversation with me on the air about immunity. And about how powerful immunity was and how natural immunity is an area we haven't explored enough because we know it can make a difference. And there's people who argue credibly that the vaccine can weaken your natural immunity. And by the way, I talked to Dr. Monica Gandhi, she was on Biden's COVID, summit. The AMA interviews her all the time on her podcast. And she acknowledged it too. She said, I don't know for sure how long and how far. And if COVID was if you had a really bad case of COVID, you have really good natural immunity. She made an interesting point. Maybe if you have mild COVID, I don't know how good your natural immunity is or how long. But she said, of course, and she's an infectious disease expert, right? The head of UCSF's infectious disease department, very well respected. She's like, and more mainstream and very pro-vaccine. But she's like, natural immunity definitely works. So why are you going to vaccinate people who've had COVID when they have a natural immunity? That's a fair debate to have. mandating it, and the hesitancy is coming from everywhere. People talk about supply shortages coming up. Why are truckers and all that not wanting to do it, right? Southwest, remember all the last few days, all the planes grounded? Really, 12, like all these thousands of flights canceled because of bad weather in Florida and Tampa. I'm in Jacksonville. I missed the bad weather. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I didn't see the hurricane that swept in and grounded all the airlines. Somehow, Southwest, all by itself, magically had all its airlines backed up because of weather in Florida. And the media is a joke on this. They say Southwest says that's what happened. They don't challenge it and go, except no other airlines had it happen, and their weather wasn't that bad in Florida. And if it was only for Friday night for a little bit, maybe in Tampa. I mean, what? No, the real story underneath, and I can't prove it, but people are suggesting and saying is pilots and crews didn't want to be vaccinated. So they're kind of doing a sort of a quiet walk-off. Is that true? I don't know. Someone should explore. Maybe they will. But you're seeing resistance. You're seeing resistance from lots of working class type entities, lots of unions, lots of trade areas, lots of mid-level things, not so much from elites, except in one area, athletes, high resistance. And as I've said before, interesting that the people who have the access to the best doctors worry about and obsessively focus on what's best for their body. They don't want to put bad stuff in their body. They want to make sure their bodies are ultimate performance machines, and they have the best medical advice available to them in the world, and they have millions of dollars. And why so much hesitancy from them? Yeah, LeBron James, thanks, Crafty. Because LeBron James said, I'm not, LeBron was really clear. I'm not, I did get it, but I wasn't sure the hesitancy, Nicki Minaj, again, people with a lot of money can ask really wealthy, can ask really powerful specialists about this. They're getting hesitancy, not because they're cuckoo. I've heard athletes saying that they feel different after the vaccine. I don't feel they have the same performance energy. It's again, and we're still having a debate about whether vaccines are going to work because breakthroughs are happening everywhere. So the fact that you're mandating it on people, on kids, on everyone, and punishing people who don't, I'm just saying there's a pushback and it's coming. People are going, this might be going too far. And by the way, I know people hate with the my body, my choice thing, but that said, Brilliant Hunter 4272, that's one argument. And I tend to stay away from the extreme conspiracy stuff, but they want to get rid of people who disagree. That said, they want more control. Maybe, or it's possible. I'm not saying you're wrong, or they're just kind of hell bent on what they thought was the case, and they're doubling down on what they do. That said, I do believe government likes power. Sometimes it's the vacuum that fills around it. Regardless, the exercise of control over people, when the pro-choice movement says my body, my choice, the Texas abortion law says no exceptions for rape or incest, I'm like, what? And a woman says it's my body, my choice. People get upset when you make the comparison to the vaccine, but it's not that different. One is saying you can't tell me what to do with my body, even if there's a living being inside of it. The other is saying, don't tell me what to put in my body. And either one can argue, you got to get the vaccine because you're going to kill people. Well, people who are pro-life are like, you're going to kill a baby. And I'm pro-choice, not pro-abortion, but pro-choice. And I'm not anti-vaccine, but I'm anti-vaccine mandate to the end. And Sage Steele at ESPN coming on Jay Cutler's Uncut podcast and saying those vaccine mandates at ESPN are scary, and not right. And she got yanked off the air. Like, people are getting tired of being told what to do, not being trusted, and then told if you question it, we'll silence you. And my point on all this is that the wave is moving, the pendulum is swinging. And I really believe that. I think there's a point. It stops being left or right. I'm seeing it moving on the left too. There's a point where our natural instinct, I think part of America, its long history of freedom and, people like to call it American exceptionalism, individualism, whatever. The idea, a nation that allowed so much freedom, innovation in markets, in speech, in lifestyle, in culture, all those things, political. It's kind of built into your mindset. The same way if you lived in China, the Chinese people had a mindset for thousands of years of having an authoritarian, an emperor. So got to have an emperor. It's a notion. China could never be a democratic country. It's so deeply rooted in the culture. I think that part of America is pushing back up, and it's not left or right. It's at a certain point going, hold on. You're saying we can't even have these conversations. Every doctor I talk to on either side of the spectrum of all this stuff has said we need to have the dialogue. You know, people are, Dave Chappelle is proving people are going, we need to let people speak. We need to let comics make jokes, and good for you for making them. And we need to start having the difficult, awkward conversations, the controversial ones. Because just saying, do this, don't do this, we'll punish you, we'll victimize you, and we'll ostracize you. All that's getting us nowhere on any side of this. It's just trapping us. And the notion that to let people make their own choices, trust people. And at a minimum, let's have, if we're going to try and do something like this, let's have a debate about it. Don't just impose it. But the pushback's coming, and you're seeing it. And you're seeing it percolating up all over. I mean, are you going to go survival mode and go out and buy food? Because I don't think it's that bad yet. But your Amazon packages are going to get delayed. Your flights are going to get delayed. You're seeing nurses walking out, people going, fire me. This is not just about the vaccine. It's about principle. It's about being free to make your own choices about your body, but also to be able to have an informed, open conversation before things are just mandated on us and you're told, do it and we're right, by a government. I've never trusted authority. I've never fully trusted our government, and I worked for our government. Don't trust it. Question it. Challenge it. That's what we were built on. And then we'll make the best decisions. Rob Nelson Live, thanks for watching.